Forget what the movies taught you. The Wild West wasn't built on polished legends. It was carried in the objects people left behind. Worn tools, battered weapons, carved tokens, and personal keepsakes that survived long after their owners disappeared. And here's the part we never got right. Most of these artifacts don't mean what we think they do. They weren't museum pieces. They were working objects, dented by weather, stained by sweat, and shaped by hard necessity, not romance. Every chip and scratch holds a truth Hollywood never shows. Today, we're uncovering 15 artifacts that rewrite the frontier. Real objects from saloons, battle sites, cattle trails, and railroad camps. Each one exposing a myth we've carried for years. No legends, no gloss, just the evidence. So dust off the old trunk, step into the lamplight, and meet the artifact that starts this journey. Number 15, the Chuckwagon Coffee Grinder, the frontier's loudest lifeline. In the 1870s, as cattle trails stretched from Texas to Kansas, cowboys depended on one machine more than any other tool on the chuckwagon. The heavy cast-iron coffee grinder bolted to its side. It was meant to keep men awake through long nights on guard duty. Instead, it became the noisiest, most stubborn artifact on the trail. Real chuckwagon grinders were not tidy hand cranks like catalog models. Surviving examples show massive iron-toothed wheels and grinding plates that rattled like tin thunder. Grinding enough beans for a dozen men could take 20 minutes and shake the entire wagon. Trail diaries describe cooks hammering the crank with both hands just to break through the morning's batch. And here is the surprise. Hollywood props get it wrong. Coffee was not pre-ground, neatly bagged, or brewed by the cup. Beans were green, hard as pebbles, and roasted in a pan before hitting the grinder. Charles Goodnight's own chuck wagon kept a grinder strapped down with iron braces, and several originals survive today in ranch museums and private collections, their gears worn smooth from years of dust-choked use. And every cowboy who heard one knew the truth. The West did not run on gunpowder. It ran on coffee. Number 14, cowboy spurs, the West's most misread status symbol. Ask most people to picture a cowboy, and they will hear the jingle of spurs before they see the hat. Movies turned them into fashion, shiny stars on polished boots. On the real frontier, spurs were rough tools first, status symbols second, and nothing about them was standard. The earliest cowhands borrowed the idea from Mexican vaqueros. Big rowels, long shanks, and swinging jingle bobs were not decoration. They were meant to reach a horse's sides from high stock saddles and carry sound across a noisy herd. Surviving trail-worn pairs show rowels worn to nubs and straps patched with rawhide, not silver. Many were not store-bought at all. Blacksmiths forged them from scrap iron and horseshoes. Some prison forges in the Southwest turned out pairs stamped with inmate numbers. Cavalry cast-offs added to the mix. Enlisted men's brass spurs were filed, bent, and welded into personal shapes. Townfolk hated them. Newspapers complained of spurs chewing up wooden floors and church pews. Some cattle towns posted signs asking men to remove them indoors. But on the trail, a man's spurs said who he was, how he rode, where he had worked, and how much money he had ever had to spend on himself. A handful of famous sets now sit behind glass in museums, inlaid with silver and scrolling steel. Most never looked that pretty. They remind us that the frontier's real luxury was not gold or engraving. It was the privilege of leaving your mark on a good horse. Number 13, the McClellan saddle, the frontier's most misunderstood seat. Hollywood loves the wide, heavy Western saddle. On the real frontier, most cowboys sat on something far leaner, harder, and older than people expect. They rode the McClellan, designed for the United States Cavalry in 1859 and adopted during the Civil War. The McClellan saddle was a bare-bones wooden tree covered in rawhide, minimal padding, an open seat, nothing between the rider and the horse's spine. It was cheap, durable, and easy to repair. By the 1870s, surplus McClellans flooded the frontier. Cowhands bought them because they could survive a 1,000-mile trail drive. Its light weight kept horses from overheating in deep summer. Its high cantle and fork gave riders stability during long hours in the saddle, but comfort was a luxury the frontier rarely offered. Diaries from Texas drovers describe the McClellan rubbing hips raw and leaving riders stiff for days. Saddlers in Dodge City, Denver, and Fort Worth modified the pattern for civilian use, adding side skirts or stamped initials, but the core design stayed the same. It was a working saddle, not a showpiece. Original examples survive sweat-darkened, scarred, and sun-worn. They prove a truth the movies never show. Cowboys did not need grand saddles. They needed saddles that survived the miles. Number 12. The Faro Table and Dealing Box, the game that ruled the West. Ask most people what gamblers played in the Old West, and they will say poker without hesitation. The real saloons tell a different story. The game that dominated the frontier was faro. Introduced to America in the early 1800s, faro spread across mining camps, cattle towns, and riverboats until no saloon was complete without a layout board, a dealing box, and a stack of chips. The game moved fast. Players bet on cards as they were drawn from a spring-loaded metal case, each turn rising and falling on luck that felt nearly instantaneous. Contemporary accounts from Deadwood and Dodge City describe faro tables running all night, long after poker players had folded and drifted home. But the truth hiding in the surviving equipment is this: faro was easy to cheat. Dealers palmed cards, rigged dealing boxes, and stacked the odds against anyone who dared challenge the house. Many tables showed tiny knife cuts along the edges where players tested layouts for tampering. Some boxes contained worn springs and bent metal lips from years of manipulation. Lawmen raided crooked games across Colorado and Kansas, yet faro remained the frontier's favorite until the early 20th century. Where there was whiskey and money, there was a faro layout waiting to take a man's pay. A handful of original boards and dealing boxes survive in museums like the Nevada State Museum and the Autry. Their faded paint and warped wood explain why faro ruled the West. It was fast, it was simple, and the house almost always won. Number 11. The Dead Man's Hand Cards, the myth that changed after the fact. Most people can recite it by heart. Aces and eights, the hand Wild Bill Hickok supposedly held when he was shot in Deadwood. But the famous combination is younger than the story itself. The real artifacts tell a different truth. Playing cards from the 1870s were fragile things, printed on stiff pasteboard and softened by hundreds of hands. Saloon decks wore down fast, patched with mismatched replacements, and scrawled with pencil marks from house rules. Surviving frontier decks found in Deadwood and Lead show bent corners and water stains, not the clean, crisp hands Hollywood imagines. As for Hickok's final hand, no one wrote it down at the time. It's one of the most repeated Wild West facts in the world, and it never actually happened. Newspapers from August 1876 mention his death, but none describe the cards. The legend of aces and eights only solidified decades later, carried by dime novels and dramatizations that needed a poetic ending. Yet the real Dead Man's Hand artifacts in museums today are period decks, not Hickok's. They show what gamblers actually used, from homemade card backs to hand-cut replacements slipped in mid-game. Some even display the soot and grease of candles burned low during all-night play. These cards remind us of a simple fact. The West did not preserve its legends in the moment. It wrote them long after the dealing box went quiet. If that surprised you, you're not alone. Drop a like, and let's keep tearing these myths apart. Number 10. Saloon Tokens, the frontier's hidden economy. Saloons in movies look lawless, loud, and improvised. The real ones ran on a system as organized as any modern business, and the surviving tokens prove it. These small brass or aluminum coins, stamped with a bar's name and the words, "Good for 1 drink" or "Good for 5 cents," were the backbone of the frontier's cash flow. Tokens appeared in the 1870s as saloon keepers needed a way to manage credit, track regulars, and keep whiskey flowing without handling cash during crowded nights. Bartenders in Dodge City, Tombstone, and Denver handed them out as change or rewards. Some served as rain checks when a patron paid early in the evening and returned later when the bar filled up. Each establishment had its own design. Some were plain discs punched on a local press. Others carried starbursts, initials, or simple pictographs. Frontier excavations in former red light districts have uncovered tokens bearing the names of vanished saloons, their lettering worn soft by countless hands. City ordinances occasionally tried to regulate them, fearing they encouraged gambling or tied workers to particular bars, but the system persisted well into the early 20th century. Surviving tokens in regional museums and private collections reveal a network more structured than the movies ever suggest. They show that a saloon was not chaos at all. It was an economy, with its own currency jingling in every pocket. Number 9. The Buffalo Hunter's Sharps Tools, the Rifleman's Traveling Workshop. A Sharps rifle on the frontier was more than a weapon. In the hands of a buffalo hunter, it was a precision instrument that demanded constant care. The tools that traveled with it tell a story most people never learned. During the 1870s, professional hunters moved across the plains with caliber-specific gear packed into wooden boxes or leather rolls. Loading and firing a Sharps was not a simple pull of the trigger. Hunters carried drop tubes for settling powder charges, wiping rods for clearing fouling, bullet molds for casting slugs on the trail, and decapping pins for spent primers. Surviving kits from Dodge City and Fort Hays show ladles blackened with soot and mold blocks worn smooth from thousands of casts. The work was slow but necessary. A day's shooting could foul a barrel so badly the rifle lost accuracy beyond 100 yards. Hunters wrote about stopping between shots to swab their bores with tallow-soaked patches. Others recorded weighing powder by eye when scales broke on the trail. The Sharps became legendary for its power, but these tools were the reason it stayed reliable. Without them, a rifle that could reach across the prairie was just a heavy club. Original Sharps kits survive today in museums and private collections, their tin boxes and scorched molds bearing the marks of long camps and harder winters. They make one thing clear: the rifle's reputation came from the work behind it, not the shot in front of it. If you're still here, you're not just watching. You're one of the people who want the real West, not the Hollywood version. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next truth we dig up. Number 8. Bite-marked bullets, the myth that never matched the evidence. Everyone has heard the phrase "bite the bullet," and many believe frontier surgeons placed lead between a wounded man's teeth during amputations. The real artifacts say otherwise. Excavations at forts and trail sites across Kansas, Texas, and the Dakotas have uncovered hundreds of soft lead bullets bearing clear tooth impressions. But these marks rarely came from battlefield agony. Soldiers bit bullets to test hardness before casting new rounds. Children used them as toys. Some accounts describe men chewing on scraps of lead out of boredom, softening them before molding. Period medical manuals barely mention bullet biting, and the few that do warn against it due to the risk of breaking teeth. Recovered bullets tell the story plainly. Many are flattened on one side, showing they were dropped and stepped on before being chewed. Others display shallow parallel grooves, evidence of someone testing alloy softness rather than clamping down in pain. Archaeologists at Fort Laramie and Fort Union report finding these bullets far from any medical area. The myth survived because it sounded dramatic. The artifacts survived because the truth was far more ordinary. A bullet with teeth marks was usually not a witness to surgery. It was a discarded fragment of daily life on the frontier. Number 7. Chinese railroad tools, the labor behind the Iron Road. Before the frontier had cattle towns or boom cities, it had a skeleton of iron stretching across the mountains. The men who laid it were largely Chinese immigrants, and the tools they used tell a story the textbooks rarely dwell on. Beginning in the early 1860s, thousands of workers from Guangdong arrived in California to build the Central Pacific Line. They carried light, strong tools patterned after those used in southern China. Narrow-headed picks, forged shovels, wicker baskets for moving fill, and wooden tampers for packing ballast. Photographs from Donner Pass show crews working in snowdrifts with nothing more than canvas coats and iron bars. The surviving tools reveal the scale of the effort. Pickheads are worn paper-thin from chipping granite tunnels. Shovel blades are bowed from years of moving crushed rock. Dynamite boxes recovered near old camps still carry hand-brushed Chinese characters marking fuse lengths and powder grades. Railroad bosses noted the workers' precision. Chinese crews graded track to tighter tolerances than many American foremen expected, using plumb lines and hand levels to keep rails true. Their camps were orderly, their tool racks neatly arranged, a contrast recorded in diaries from engineers on the line. Yet their contribution faded into myth as the West celebrated settlers and cowboys instead. Museums in Sacramento and Cheyenne now hold the tools that remain, rusted and worn, each one a reminder of the men who carved a railroad through mountains with muscle, grit, and little recognition. The West did not rise from Gunsmoke alone. It rose from steel, swung by hands history tried to forget. Number 6. Indigenous horse gear, the tack that outran the frontier. Long before cowboys rode the plains, indigenous nations had perfected horse gear built for speed, endurance, and control. The surviving bridles and rawhide bozels used by Apache, Comanche, and other plains riders reveal a sophistication most people never imagined. These pieces were crafted from braided rawhide, often softened, cut, and twisted by hand, with tools made from bone or antler. Unlike heavy leather saddlery adopted by settlers, indigenous tack was light and flexible. A well-braided bozel could guide a horse with the slightest pressure, and a rawhide headstall weighed almost nothing at all. Museum examples from the early 19th century show exquisite geometric patterns worked into the braid. Some include wrapped horsehair reins or metal cones traded from Spanish or Mexican sources. Others bear signs of heavy use, the fibers polished smooth from long rides across open grassland. These designs were not merely artistic. Warriors needed gear that kept their mounts agile during hunts and battles. Spanish chroniclers in the 1700s wrote of Comanche riders who could turn a horse at full gallop with a single tug. Later, American soldiers learned the hard way that their own tack was clumsy by comparison. As reservations expanded in the late 19th century, many traditional pieces were sold, traded, or passed down quietly through families. Those that survived now sit in collections from Oklahoma to New Mexico, their braided strands still strong after more than a century. They show that the frontier's greatest riders were not the cowboys who came later. They were the people who mastered the horse first. Number 5. The Frontier Medical Kit, the tools that decided who lived and who didn't. Before clean hospitals and modern antibiotics, frontier medicine relied on a small leather case packed with tools that were as feared as they were necessary. The surviving kits show how brutal and improvised frontier care truly was. Doctors and army surgeons carried folding bone saws, amputation knives, forceps, scalpels, tourniquets, and glass bottles filled with chloroform or laudanum. Many sets were imported from England or Germany in the 1850s and 1860s, but frontier physicians mixed those instruments with homemade remedies. Some kits found in Kansas and Montana include sewing needles and coarse linen thread, used to close wounds after a battlefield amputation. Weather shaped the tools as much as surgery did. Metal corroded quickly on the plains, so surgeons wrapped blades in oiled cloth or stuffed them into cork-lined slots. Leather cases stiffened in winter and softened in summer until the hinges cracked. Notes from U.S. Army field surgeons mention sharpening saws with pocket stones minutes before operating. Pain was unavoidable. Chloroform was precious and often diluted. Ether evaporated too quickly in heat. Men wrote about biting down on belts while surgeons worked fast enough to stay ahead of shock. Recovered kits in museums from Santa Fe to Fort Laramie tell the same story. Saw teeth dulled from heavy use, knife handles worn smooth, glass bottles cloudy with age. These artifacts are not symbols of frontier heroism. They are reminders of how fragile life was when infection and injury waited behind every mile. Out here, survival depended not just on skill or luck, but on the tools that could cut, clamp, or save a life before the plains claimed it. Number 4. Colt conversions, the revolvers that bridged two eras. Before the West carried factory cartridge revolvers, it carried hybrids, old percussion pistols rebuilt to fire modern ammunition. These Colt conversions were not polished collectibles. They were working guns adapted to a changing frontier. In the late 1860s, as metallic cartridges spread across the country, gunsmiths in St. Louis, Denver, and Santa Fe began modifying Colt 1851 Navies, 1860 Armies, and other cap and ball revolvers. They cut loading levers, milled recoil shields, and installed bored-through cylinders fitted with loading gates. Factory-sanctioned conversions followed soon after, but countless frontier examples were homemade, each one slightly different from the next. Surviving revolvers show the signs. Some have mismatched barrels taken from broken pistols. Others carry hand-filed gates and rough dovetail cuts for rear sights. Grips were replaced with whatever a gunsmith had at hand: walnut, bone, or even wrapped rawhide. Auction examples from Kansas and Colorado display chambers reamed unevenly, proof of trail-side work done with limited tools. These conversions mattered. Cartridges were cleaner, faster, and more reliable than percussion caps. A man with a converted Colt could reload in seconds instead of fumbling with loose powder and paper cartridges. Accounts from buffalo hunters and stage line guards describe conversions running until the cylinders shook loose. By the mid-1870s, the Colt single-action army made conversions obsolete, but the hybrids stayed in service for years. They appear in estate inventories across the frontier, valued for practicality rather than pride. The surviving examples in the Cody Firearms Museum and private collections show the truth. The West did not leap from smoke clouds to shining new revolvers. It passed through an era of improvised solutions, where old guns learned new tricks because men needed them to. Number 3. Frontier rosaries and medallions, the faith the West forgot. When people picture the frontier, they see grit, gunsmoke, and hard men who lived by their own code. What they rarely picture is faith. Yet the artifacts tell another story. Rosaries, crucifixes, and small devotional medallions appear in frontier camps from Texas to Montana, carried by soldiers, settlers, and cowhands who lived closer to danger than comfort. Catholic immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Mexico brought their own pieces across the plains. Simple wooden rosaries, brass St. Christopher medals, or stamped tin crosses bought from traveling priests. Protestant soldiers carried pocket New Testaments with metal clasps or tiny carved cross pendants tucked into uniform pockets. Archaeologists at Fort Union and Fort Davis have recovered rosary beads made of bone, glass, and even rolled clay, worn smooth from handling. These were not decorative items. On long campaigns or cattle drives, they were reminders of home, protection, or repentance. Cavalry letters mention men praying before night patrols. Trail diaries from New Mexico note ranch hands who refused to sleep without their medal under their shirt. In mining camps, medallions were passed from man to man before dangerous shifts underground. Most were small, cheap, and easily lost. That is why the surviving examples matter. Museums in Santa Fe, El Paso, and Oklahoma preserve pieces found in abandoned cabins, soldier graves, and trading post sites. Tiny objects that traveled thousands of miles in pockets and saddlebags. They reveal a truth the movies forget. The frontier was not faithless. It was full of men carrying belief in the only place they could keep it safe, close to the heart. Number 2. Filed sight, peacemakers, the gunfighters, real modifications. The Colt single-action army is the most recognized revolver of the West, but the pristine, out-of-the-box peacemaker we see in films never existed on the frontier. The real guns were altered, battered, and tuned by hand. And the most telling modification of all was the filed sight. Cowboys, lawmen, and scouts carried revolvers that needed to hit where they aimed, not where the factory set them. Shooters filed front sights down to raise their point of impact or widened the rear notch with pocket knives for faster alignment. Surviving peacemakers from Texas Ranger collections show sights shaved to shallow wedges. Others display crude cross-hatching to reduce glare under sun. But the modifications went deeper. Grips were replaced with carved bone or reworked walnut after years of wear. Cylinders were rebored to accept more common ammunition on the frontier. Some frames show cold chisel marks where gunsmiths tightened loose screws or adjusted timing by hand. No two working guns were exactly alike. They evolved with their owners. Period photographs reveal the same story. revolvers with mismatched finishes, worn bluing, and barrel lengths cut down for speed. Accounts from Arizona and New Mexico mention deputies who filed their sights aggressively for close work in dim saloons, trading precision at distance for speed inside 20 feet. Original modified peacemakers in the Cody Firearms Museum and private ranch collections tell the full truth. The West's gunfighters did not rely on factory perfection. They shaped their revolvers to their own eyes and hands, turning each piece into a personal tool. The legends carried clean Colts. The men who survived carried Colts they had already improved. Number 1. The boot knife, the frontier's most misunderstood weapon. No artifact from the West has been more distorted by Hollywood than the knife a man actually carried. Films show huge bowies flashing in the sun. The real frontier knife was smaller, simpler, and far more common. It was the boot knife. Across the 1870s and 1880s, soldiers, cowboys, buffalo hunters, and drifters carried thin, fixed blades tucked inside their boots or slipped between the top of the boot and the trouser leg. Most were inexpensive trade knives or cut-down kitchen blades, sharpened to a narrow point and built for utility more than combat. Surviving examples from forts in Kansas and Dakota Territory show blades barely 5 inches long, their handles wrapped in rawhide or worn wood. These knives were tools first. Men used them to cut harness, open tins, scrape hides, or split kindling. But when danger came fast, they were the only weapon a man could reach when he had no time for a revolver. Diaries from cattle drives mention riders cutting free from rope tangles or pinned horses. Court records from frontier towns list boot knives as the weapon most often seized in late-night brawls. Most were homemade. Blacksmiths shaped blades from files or broken tools. Hunters reshaped butcher knives to fit snugly inside a boot. Scabbards were simple leather sleeves, stitched quickly and waxed against sweat. The knife's position kept it hidden until the moment it mattered. Authentic boot knives in museums from Santa Fe to Deadwood show the same traits: short blades, narrow tangs, simple handles, and sheaths darkened by years of wear. None look like the heroic bowies made for movie posters. The frontier knife was not carried for show. It was carried because it was the one weapon a man could reach when everything else failed. 15 artifacts, from coffee grinders to cartridge tools, and everyone tells the same truth. The real West wasn't built on legend. It was built on objects shaped by hard miles, harsh weather, and men who worked without an audience. These artifacts weren't symbols. They were necessities. Each one solved a problem the movies never show, from keeping a rifle alive to keeping a rider in the saddle. Every scratch, stain, and worn edge is a record of real lives lived far from the polished myth. Hollywood polished the frontier into a clean story. History left behind the evidence, and those surviving pieces, dark with sweat, chipped by use, faded by sun and time, are where the West actually lived. If you've stayed with this countdown, you've seen how much of the frontier we've misunderstood. No legends, no retellings, just the physical truth of a generation that survived without scripts or spotlights. Subscribe if you want the next piece of the West as it truly was, not the version the movies tried to sell us.